All right, today we're going to talk about belts again. This is actually a video I've been wanting to do for a while. I just hadn't done it and gotten around to it. I got us a whiteboard. I'll be doing some very pitiful drawing here in a minute. We're going to talk about belt dimensions and what you can manipulate, what you can't, why they're important to you, and how making changes to each one of the dimensions affects you. All right, normally I do not have notes. I don't have a script, but I did write some notes on a piece of paper over here off camera, so I might check it every now and then, make sure I covered things. So today we're going to discuss length, width, and thickness of a belt, what each one of them do, and then how they work with each other. And then we will get to what I would consider an ideal dimensionally accurate belt, which you've been following along with our new next level belts. If it's a machine that we have here that we're working on a belt for, I'll assure you when it leaves here, it'll be dimensionally accurate, okay? And then the last topic, which we'll just put first, is, you know, we have competitors, obviously, but do you need 5 or 6 different belts for the same machine? And my answer to that is no. There's no good reason to do that. The belt manufacturers that I deal with, the reputable ones here in the United States, said that's just silly. 2 at max. You can have, for lack of a better term, you could have a slow person's belt and a fast person's belt. And honestly, anybody in between is so easy on belts that they could go either way. So there's really no need for it. And I bet you if you ordered all 5 or 6 for the same machine, you'd probably end up with a couple at least. The same part number is just foolery with the names. So just knock that out of the way. Okay. So length of a belt is very important. But before we get into that, 100% of the time, we never start with a belt from scratch here at Hunterworks. All right, so whatever machine it may be, it'll come in with the OEM belt and we check it. There's a picture we send a lot of times on for troubleshooting videos, and I'm a terrible artist, so just bear with me. All right, this is inside of a primary clutch, okay? And there's your bearing in the center. So where is this belt sitting? You know, how much gap is there here and here, okay? That's very important, all right? First of all, we have a particular dimension that we shoot for on width, okay? But we want to make it as wide as possible to leave room for error on belt alignment and some other little error. And so that's first and foremost. So if a belt comes in here, and this is a pretty good picture, I guess, if it was that wide, just entirely too wide, and you go, we really need to widen this belt up. Well, first of all, you say, why would you want to widen it up? Because, for example, the CF Moto that we're working on right now, the belt is entirely too narrow. The engagement RPM is 2100, and it should be closer to like 1600, so you got to widen up the belt. But before we can widen it, we have to check a couple of things. But let's finish that out. Why would a narrow belt or a wide belt have an effect on engagement? Because let's say this is the movable sheave side, okay? And as you rev up the engine, this clutch is coming over and makes contact with the belt, and then it's gonna have to make contact with the back. So you gotta move over, then push this over, and all that takes RPM before you get started. So if you can get this belt centered and wide enough, then you don't have far to push it, and you can have a pretty low engagement RPM, okay? Now, some vehicles, we may not even be able to make it wider, even though it might need to be, and you go, why is that? Because when you make a belt wider, I don't know if this particular drawing is going to be able to demonstrate that or not, but when you make it wider, that has the same effect as making it shorter. Because if let's take this out of the equation. Let's give an extreme example of this clutch. Let's change nothing about a belt but width. All right, you make it so much wider. Now it sits way up here. Whoop, I can't draw obviously. So it sits way up here because it's so much wider. All right, and then in the secondary clutch, this is where you get a sensation of shorter. It's going to be pulling the secondary clutch apart. Okay, well, I am really bad at this. Pulling the secondary apart, because if you try to put something wider in this V, well, it's got to pull it down, and that opens up the secondary. If you make a belt shorter and not wider, that has the same effect. So I hope that part makes sense to you. So with that being said, when you're trying to get it dimensionally accurate in the primary, you have to be very mindful of how much room, if any, you have at the bottom of the secondary clutch. I'll get Hunter to enter in a picture right here, and I'm gonna talk during the picture part, but you'll see this is a secondary clutch that the belt has been running not to the top and not all the way to the bottom, kind of in between. So that's actually that CF Moto I was talking about that's not wide enough, all right, in the clutch for the engagement. But by looking at the secondary, that tells us we can widen it up without too much concern for over traveling it too far down in the secondary. So back to here. So what I'm just saying is if we widen that belt up, it has so much travel down here at the bottom that we can do that, okay? So width, again, has an effect the same as change in length. A narrow belt makes clutches come together closer, and it makes it the same thing as if you lengthen the belt, same as in the rear. If you narrowed it up, that clutch is coming closer together, and then the belt goes up. Vice versa, you make it wider, the clutch opens up, it goes deeper in the secondary, and up here in the primary, same thing, okay? So length and width play an enormous role with each other. And there's a fine line between getting that correct, because in an ideal situation, this is a surface of a clutch and here's the center, you want that belt to run as far, stay at the bottom and go all the way to the top if possible. You want to use all of the clutch. Mainly we're talking about secondary here, but point is, you want to use as much as the clutch is available. The worst culprit that I've seen for this so far has been a Kawasaki Ridge, and we're presently working on that today. So whatever date you're watching this, it might already be done, but today's date, June 18th, my birthday, by the way. Yeah, happy birthday. I got 57 years old. But it doesn't travel very far at all. It's kind of like this and like that and primary too. But we cannot change the belt width on that belt because it's already as wide as it needs to be when it goes down in the primary clutch. It doesn't have much room, so we cannot change it. And as a matter of fact, on that particular one, we can't change the length either. So we're kind of playing with a hand of cards that's dealt with us on the Kawasaki Ridge as far as belt is concerned. Now we're going to make one, we'll make it a little better, whatever, but we can't change the dimensions on it. We can mention that CF Moto, for example, and manipulate it, okay? Now, so hopefully you understand at this point length and width of belts and how they work with each other. The next topic, or really that really matters on belts, is thickness, okay? When would you want a thick belt and when would you want a thin belt? It's pretty easy to me. Let's use two different vehicles, in my opinion, two different applications. A Polaris Ranger, which is a work vehicle, most of the time driven slow, heavy loads, and then polar opposite of that would be a Polaris Razor Turbo, or in the Can-Am world, a Defender or an X3, okay? So anything that's most of the time being driven slow versus fast. Slow, you're gonna want more friction in the belt because right down here, let me use my hand here and redraw our clutch, okay? Man, I failed art class, so let's draw some little bitty lines and then and extend them. So let's say there's our thin belt and there's our contact patch with a side, but what if we could make it this big and have that? It's exaggeration, obviously. You don't normally go about 50, 60 thousandths or so thicker, but point is now look at the difference. We got that much more friction on that belt so that the clutch can grab a hold of it, not slip, and really do well for load. Now today's date, we don't have it all ready yet, but what you're going to see in the future is a rock crawling belt, if you will, say for a turbo, when all actuality, it's really just going to be the Ranger belt, because the Ranger needs that thicker one and the Razor needs a thinner. I don't know that I covered why you would want a thin one. A thin one does not hold as much heat as a thick one does, and if you're high speeding it, dooning, anything fast, long distance, you want to try to dissipate the heat out of the belt quick as you can. You go, well, why aren't our belts, all belts made the same thickness and just kind of hit it in the middle? Well, the thing about that is that there's different compounds, the materials that the belts are made out of, and some are stronger than the other. The only way that you can make a thinner belt for a high horsepower application is to come up with a super strong compound like we recently have in our some of our new belts, our next level belts. And then it's so much stronger, it doesn't have to be as thick, and then we can run that thinner belt. Of course, there's a fine line. You get too thin, you don't get enough belt grip. The point is, you can run it and it'll stay cooler and it'll handle higher temperatures. Versus if you run a thicker belt doing all that, it just holds in so much heat and then it can get destroyed, okay? So thicker also, here's another point, before I forget it, I am ad-libbing on this part. Thicker, we would tend to have a tendency to want to have a softer, which is not really a true word in the belt world, but that's just what a lot of people understand. You want to have a softer compound in a thick belt so that it has more friction and grabs better, okay? And then in your higher speed stuff, you don't need that soft belt. We'll call it harder, but it's technically not hard. But you'd want a harder compound and that does not grip quite as well down here, but holds up to all the heat. Okay, so we go through a lot of steps here to determine if a belt is right, and then when it's not, we try to manipulate it. One thing that I didn't cover on length earlier, and I hope you stuck with me this far, I'm kind of a belt nerd these days, but being able to work with our two new companies, MBL and Gates, the way we are, like never before, I've been able to take a much deeper dive into these belts than we've ever been able to do before. But belts are made on sleeves, tools, whatever you want to call them. They're drums, okay? If I can twist this belt, which FYI, don't put a belt backwards. A belt is made like this on a drum, okay? So you layer materials up, and depending on the manufacturer, depending on the belt, it'll go through a pot, a curing oven, if you will, and it's vulcanization. If you heard that term way back, Goodyear, vulcanized tires, but the point is, it's put together with heat in upside down. All right, so depending on the drum size, that's what determines the length of the belt. So they have just hundreds of drums for different belt lengths. Now, with that being said, and hopefully this will be the last thing I cover here today, I don't want to hold you too long, is that I'm working presently today. Again, whenever you're watching this video, it may already be out, but we're working on a Ranger belt, if you will, and so one of the samples we got in, it was too short. Thick was right, width was right, all that was great, but it was too short. All right, now we could narrow it up to help compensate that, but then we would have a high engagement RPM, and that makes it a moot point. Why do it? So how do we get to keep a thick belt, same width, but make it longer? Well, I say, hey, which tool was this belt made on? And with one of the manufacturers I deal with, they have three particular tools, and for lack of better terms, we'll call them small, medium, and large. So I believe that one was made on the medium tool, all right? Now, you're gonna have to make some samples on the large tool or the larger diameter, and then once you make that on a larger diameter, see, then this thickness, which goes up here, which once you flip it back around, makes the idea of the holes larger than it used to be, although the thickness stayed the same, the width stayed the same. Okay, now, with that being said, the width would stay the same at the cord, but at the very bottom, it would actually be narrower because that's where we're gonna put our thickness at. We're not going to change from cord up, we're changing cord down. So since a belt is on an angle, it'll grow. I guess we could turn around this way. It'll grow more at a point, so it would actually be smaller by a slight amount at the bottom of the cogs than say this one would be, okay? So the purpose of this video is if anybody's just curious how belts are made or aftermarket belts are made, or really honestly what lengths Hunterworks goes to make sure that we have 100% dimensionally accurate belts. And I talk with both my companies, and nobody else does this. And I think it's kind of a pain in their tail because they just want to make what they make and stick your name on it and let you sell it under your name. And I'm not doing it. If it ain't right, we don't want to. That's why that's one of the reasons we left our first company, is these opportunities to make these higher quality belts, higher quality materials, higher quality manufacturing techniques, and lastly, and most important, allow me to get these belts dimensionally accurate as possible. And then while on that, this will be the last thing I say, is I am like a mini database. If you have problems with something, I hear it, same old thing over and over, then hey, there's a problem. We fix it. We're not going to let any problem continue to make a buck. We just don't operate that way. When we say best on the planet, we freaking mean it. And I promise you, these newest belts that we call our next level belts are the most dimensionally accurate CVT belts on the planet, hands down. Nobody even comes close to what we're doing. Anyway, so I hope I didn't bore you to death and you learned something about belt dimensions and why they're important, and lastly, why they may be different from your OE. Don't get alarmed, we got it right. All right, any questions, comments, put them below in the comments. Make sure you subscribe and like. And if you need me directly, I am the only belt company that you can actually email the owner and talk to him. Todd@hunterworks.com if you need me. Thanks.